Hello, everyone, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us in today's webinar under the Sustainability and Livelihood Research Organization, Suliver. My name is CJ, and the topic we are looking at today is the issue of climate education, enlightenment, and communication. A very, very crucial topic in today's world. So wherever you're joining us from, we are very, very happy and delighted that you made the time to join us. Thank you. Today's webinar, we are very, very lucky and privileged to have three outstanding scholars, advocates, and activists that have agreed to share what they are doing with us. First, we have the person of our first presenter is Mr. Frank Nipple. Frank is a well-known scholar in the field of climate education. He is the senior climate education manager as well as the climate education coordinator at NOOA's climate program office in Silver Spring, Maryland, USA. And he has also been involved in a number of United Nations climate change framework and other agreements that are related to that. We're going to be hearing from Frank first. Our second presenter is going to be Jane Kirster. Jen is the program coordinator or director of the Youth and Climate Education Program at the center, at the Wives Center, which is a science center in Adirondack Park in northern part of New York State. And she has a wealth of experience in the area of climate education. And our last presenter, but not the least, is Monica Braith. Monica is a determined advocate for climate and energy literacy. She's involved in a number of other issues within the local and international environment. She has a number of education experience in terms of climate and sustainable development. Above all, Monica is an active member of the Suliver Boys. She's the board of the Suliver Sustainability and Livelihood Research Organization. She's the chair of the board. And we are very, very privileged to have these three activists and advocates joining us today. So without wasting much time, we're going to hand over the mic to the first presenter, but this is how we're going to do it really quickly. One, feel free, all our attendees can feel free to type in your questions. We're going to let them finish because they're presenting on one slide. We're going to allow them to finish their presentation, and thereafter we go through the questions you have for us. And then you can always, in the course of presentation, type in your questions. So we have limited time for their presentation, so they might have the opportunity to elaborate in the course of Q&A. So without much ado, I'm going to hand over our presentation mic now to Mr. Nipple. Thank you, Frank. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, CJ. It's a great honor to be here, and very excited to share the extensive work that our community has done in the United States for benefit for anyone in the world or others in our country. So, here just a little bit more detail about who we are, but the real focus that I have, and by the way, CJ, it's a NOAA, but that's okay. But the reason why I figured I'd start with this image. Climate education had become a priority through 6 waves of federal and philanthropic efforts across the years in the United States, starting all the way back in the 70s. And so when you think about making progress on the advancements of science and the implications of society, education naturally becomes a priority, but it's a waning priority. It comes and then it goes, and it comes and it goes. And yet, if you try and think about how society is going to address the challenges that this image shows, and if you're not seeing it, sea level rise is going to be a major challenge for, this is the city of Baltimore in Maryland, the United States. The challenges for this city of what they're going to have to do to transform all that energy that they use in order to be low carbon and to be resilient to the changes that are coming over the coming decades and centuries is massive. And it is so this community is going to have to re-engineer in major ways, and which calls two major things that education is at the center of. It is going to have to build a community that is knowledgeable, skillful, understanding, and supportive of massive priorities that are currently not really their priorities. They think about other things. And to help them get there is going to be a very sizable amount of work. And the other one is to prepare the future workforce. So, then you have other communities where you have communities like in West Texas, where they've historically used one form of energy production and are finding that they can make a livable economy in another form of energy production all at the same time. And they're finding that wind is moving forward. But why I chose this image is because it's about jobs in this community. And they are very supportive of their future generations getting good, solid paying jobs, and they don't destroy the economy in the process, or the climate system for themselves or others in the rest of the world. Because remember, we live in one atmosphere now. So, why that is significant here is because there's an education gap. If you want a future workforce and you want a citizenry that is able to skillfully and effectively navigate this incredible challenge, it takes time. These young students were with us in Paris at the COP21 meeting. Jen was also there with me, as were some of the other people on the call. And we were really raising up the power and the potential of education to address the international effort to avoid dangerous anthropogenic or human-caused climate change. What we found there was a very sizable power and potential. And the other thing I love about this image is that it shows hope, excitement, motivation. Let me do my part. Let me get ready to do my part in very significant ways. And, if you're a college student, you're going to be joining the workforce in 4 years, maybe 6 years, something like that. If you are a middle schooler, you're going to be joining the workforce after a college degree in 11 years. So, a lot of our carbon target goals are somewhere between 2040 and 2050. That's 30 years, 32 years from now. So if you don't think about education being a powerful tool to effectively and successfully address your carbon, climate, resilience goals, it's always going to be an Achilles heel in society and communities and businesses. And we are calling for this massive enterprise to be aligned with these priorities across countries, communities. So that's really what we're talking about here, just to give you some framing. But there's a lot of detail that we can get into. So as I said, that in the United States, there've been these major waves of priority on climate, global change, education since the 70s. We've got documents, reports, different pieces, really mature strategies that have been built up across our decades. And through the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, I'm a reporting lead on what we do for education, training, and public awareness for the United States. And we bring to the table tremendous assets, but we do it in the spirit of collaboration, which is really what the article in the treaty says. That was reaffirmed in the this idea of collaboration is a really central way that we can learn from others who are embarking on this work, and we can share with what we have in the spirit of collaboration and cooperation. So, this slide is just about some of the details of the amazing work that has gone on in the United States to be part of our solution. what can we do to bring this forward? And down that center where there's reports, the 2014 CAR, it's called the Climate Action Report. It's what we write to the international community about what we're doing to address climate change. And in there is a chapter on education, training, and public awareness. It's one I lead. And I think it is a rich place to start if you want to learn some details. But it also there's a lot more that's going on. That's just a snapshot. It's a sampling. But all forms of education are being brought forward here. So I think that it's a really exciting opportunity for us to share with what's working in the United States, what's working across our country. And, this is a mature place. Now, I've added a few internationally focused programs from our large reservoir of capabilities. So they're here. You'll be able to download these slides. Those are active links. This is just a sampling. There's so much more, and I'll show you how to get to the more. But these are very exciting. The bottom one there, I just want to point out, is a very new resource where education is helping communities advance their climate actions in a very impressive way. It's kind of more education for decision makers. Coming out of the education community, so it's different. But then, some of the other ones where we have the climate resources and through the process, the climate literacy guide turns out to, and there's also an energy literacy guide, turns out to be a really important document. I'm the lead of that, and it just sets up the framework for what is climate education. But also energy education is centrally important. I've just updated the document for 2017 science and some refinements. But then another program about training on START is that the US funds collaboratively with others around the world is another important asset. But I find that these strategies, these programs, these models, there are so many sometimes that it's hard to navigate for what your purpose and what you're looking for. But I think for anyone who's looking for resources or program models or collaborations, there's a lot to build from. I think one of the areas that we really struggle with historically and even presently is how do we help each other and how do we build those bridges between each of us. But I think the one of the things that has evolved in our community over the last couple years is how does education support community climate actions? And it turns out that communities that are already advancing climate actions are struggling in some key ways that I think education and public engagement, civic engagement, and workforce development are actually very well positioned to help them with. Sustaining the case for climate action turns out to be a really hard thing when you're going from leader to leader, leader to leader. We're going to be talking about many, many leaders across these decades. And the community, for them, they're having a hard time sustaining the case for this action against all these other priorities that they carry. Schools, higher education, colleges, free choice learning can all be better prepared to focus on this critical issue. It's not a natural for them, but it's a tremendous potential. National governments and philanthropic and corporate organizations. It appears that they have to some degree, but that more can be done there. But I think that what we're finding is that through activation of these extensive education systems, the opportunity to address these challenges and these opportunities that these civic leaders are having is really is an amazing potential that we've just got to right now. And I think that the next decade or so is going to be really sharpening and showing what we can do at a very focused level, community level. And one of those advances is this idea of which audiences do we focus on. Different people focus on different audiences, but this is a framework for how we would approach some audiences. And in the last 3 years, the focus on future workforce became very, very important, but also the idea of key influentials, educating key influentials, not just formal and informal education, but also our indigenous communities in the United States, but that doesn't apply to only us, are also a critical audience. But then at the center of it is really youth. And that has come about through the leadership of people like Jen Kretzer, where we now really are focusing programs directly on youth, not on educators or informal educators who then work with youth. And turns out that they're a very powerful audience, and that's why they're in the center of this schematic. The last thing I'll say here is, one way that we collaborate in the United States is through something called the Climate Literacy and Energy Awareness Network that started back in 2008. And many people on the phone might be members of this already, but if you're not, it's a very easy thing to join and benefit from. It's a growing network, it's a healthy network, but it's about enhancing collaboration. And there's no reason why this should be only United States focused. There are members who are international, but it can serve multiple audiences if others. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Jen. Sorry, I've been jumping in and out of reception. It seems like I jump in and out. So anyway, I'm done.
All right, thank you very much, Frank. We are now handing over to Jane for her part of the presentation. Jane, take over. Thank you.
Thank you so much, CJ. Again, my name is Jen Kretzer, and I'm the Director of Programs in the Youth Climate Initiative at the Wild Center. And we're a science museum located in northern New York State in the center of the Adirondack Park, which is a huge 6 million acre park. What I'd like to share with you today is a program that we developed here about 10 years ago, and it's been growing steadily since then. This program, our Youth Climate Program, engages, empowers, and inspires young people to not only learn, but act on climate change. We put youth at the center, helping to facilitate opportunities for them to connect directly through student-driven action in their schools and communities. And the model that we've created has been successfully replicated and scaled in many across New York State, across the US, and around the globe. So I want to share with you this this model that we've developed, and also how you can get involved and create this kind of youth climate program in your own place. So first of all, kind of this core part of our program is our annual Youth Climate Summit. So the Youth Climate Summit is a 2-day event which brings together roughly 200 to 250 youth between the ages of 15 and 21, so high school and college, together in the to our museum to learn about the science of climate change, the impacts of climate change at a local and global level, as well as focusing on solutions. We do that by creating multiple opportunities for students to learn the content, so they have a strong understanding of that science. We have roughly 20 workshops and sessions ranging from energy, biodiversity, waste, transportation, local food systems, understanding renewables, sustainability, and also with a strong emphasis on career paths. So we have a very strong content knowledge piece. We also really emphasize youth leadership. So Frank, alluding back to the schematic that Frank showed with youth at the center, we've really seen the role of youth, the important role that youth can play in their schools and communities. So we have a strong element of youth leadership workshops that happen at our Youth Climate Summit. And those workshops could be anything on public speaking, how to run an environmental club in their schools, how to project manage, how to see a project go from start to finish, how to do grant writing, how to organize and create campaigns in their schools and communities. So we really emphasize both the climate science content, the solutions, as well as this youth leadership piece. Over the course of the 2 days, the students have the opportunity to attend lots of different workshops. They also get to learn and think about their own place. We really do emphasize learning about the climate impacts at home. So understanding what's happening in their home communities, in their regions, whether that's, for us here in the Adirondacks, a decreased snowfall, heavier storms, more drought. So we're really emphasizing that. But other places and other locations that we've done the Youth Climate Summit, such as in Sri Lanka or possibly North Carolina, where I was this past weekend, they're looking at different climate impacts. one of the pieces we also make sure to do during our 2-day summit is to make sure students have ample opportunity to present, to network, to showcase their own projects, to connect with other students that are working on different projects, to have the opportunity to really feel like their voice is heard. We have students that help us plan and organize the summit. We work really hard to make sure that those students have an opportunity to really share what they're doing and how they want to make a difference. That's part of the empowerment piece, and it helps for them to develop their own sense of agency and their own like really find their own passion and their own path in all of this, to think about climate change and climate solutions. So at the core part of our project, and I think there were some questions that came in earlier about best practices with climate change, a lot of the research is pointing to now that it's not just about knowledge and understanding, but it's actually about developing those action competencies. And by that, I mean those skills by taking what they've learned and actually applying it. So we have a framework that students develop a climate action plan. So every school that attends and every student that attends develops a plan to take back to their schools and communities and implement throughout the year. And those plans are student driven. So it's not something that I'm saying like you should do this or you should do that, but it's something that's really driven by the students. And I think that that's a really key point, that makes all the difference. They're motivated, they're empowered, they want to see that project through. And those projects are really varied. So they can be developing a carbon and energy audit for their school. They could be creating school gardens. They could be installing a solar powered charging station for cell phones. They could be developing action awareness events for their school or for their community. They have done such an array of projects over the course of the year. Like, it's really incredible. They're very creative. The students are super innovative and motivated to do these projects, and it demonstrates for them success. So what that does is take them not just back into the school working with the student body, but it also takes them into the community. And it has some intersecting with lots of different of what Frank called influentials. So civic and community leaders, whether they're from churches or community groups, from government agencies or other NGOs, the students are having the opportunity to impact and connect with them and talk about why they care about climate change and actually do something about it. So it's this collective process of climate action planning that really empowers those students to identify those local challenges and create a solutions framework through that self-defined action. So that's been a really critical part of the summit. And so once the students finish that summit, the 2-day summit here at the Wild Center, they go back to their schools and communities with that completed climate action plan, working throughout the year to put that into place. And then we help support them through coaching, mentoring, leadership skill development. We're now doing leadership retreats with our students, and we're also adding this coming year teacher climate institutes to help support the teachers that are involved with mentoring the students in their schools. So as I mentioned earlier, we have actually been able to develop a free online toolkit to help other places do and lead summits. So these are all the places that we've been working with across the globe that have done youth climate summits. So they're very scalable and replicable. They've gone from, a 1-day summit at a high school to a 3-day summit that we did last year in Sri Lanka that was focused on college students. We also had summits this past year at an international school in Germany, and one that was run through an NGO in Liberia. So they really vary in their scope, in their length, but they utilize our toolkit and the framing that I described, helping students come together in teams, learn about climate change at a global and local level, understand the impacts that are happening in their communities. So they develop that science piece, but then they really shift that towards action that's solution oriented, and that helps for them to network and connect and to work in their schools and communities and feel empowered and work on those action competencies, as I've mentioned. So it's been really exciting to see this model, get adapted to all of these different places. So when we first started this, coming from a science museum, I thought it would really catch on in the science museum realm, and it has to some extent. There have been a few science centers that have done it, notably Herika Science Museum in Finland and the Michigan Science Center in Detroit. But we've also had, as I mentioned, many different schools take it on, NGOs take it on. Specifically, I mentioned the one in Sri Lanka that was developed by the Ministry of Health and their Community Resilience Center. So they were really coming at it from a health perspective and looking at that resiliency piece, which is so critical, especially in a place like Sri Lanka, where the impacts of climate change are very present almost on a daily basis. We've also have some new summits that are coming up this year. Notably, there's one in Flagstaff, Arizona, in the western part of the United States, which is actually working through the city of Flagstaff. So it's being developed in conjunction with their climate action plan. So that's something that's also been really exciting to see kind of the differences across the board. So as I said, we have a free online toolkit, and I'm happy, of course, to provide any opportunities for questions or at the end of our presentation on how to download that. The other piece I just wanted to mention from the youth leadership perspective, I've had the opportunity to work with Frank and other organizations in the US to help raise the youth voice at a national and global level. So we've, through our program at the Wild Center, we've been able to get students to go to the UN in New York City to have a presence there as part of some major climate talks, as well as most recently at the UN COP conferences. So this is an image from the 2015 conference in Paris, but other colleagues through Climate Generations or the Alliance for Climate Education have also had students present at subsequent COPs in Morocco and Bonn. So it's been really critical to get that youth voice to be part of the discussion. So I think that's my presentation. So I think we can turn it over to Monica.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Jen. Just for the benefit of our participants that are just joining us, please feel free to type in your question. I can see some of our presenters are also beginning to answer some of the questions that are already there. So type in your questions, and they will now address those questions after the whole presentation. Now let's go to our last presenter, Monica. Thank you.
Thank you, CJ, and to everyone listening. I appreciate it. So today I just want to really plant a seed. All of you can probably understand the benefits of both Frank and Jen's work. And so I want you to think about this. If we are to truly mitigate climate change, I think it's time to change the way we're educated and how we fund that change. The National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine conclude that climate change is an education issue. And that is really the most important foundation for moving forward. So on to the next slide. There is a Yale study a couple of years ago that talks about education and its role in moving forward. And yet, funding for technology and policy has really been at the forefront of most foundations. And the reality is that this has sort of left people like Frank and Jen to figure out a way to move forward on what they're doing. And what has this led to? Well, I'm going to give you a very simple example. So I was dealing with energy policy, energy efficiency, and I asked a champion legislator, what did he need to be successful in his ability to adopt energy efficiency policy? And he said, well, I need a plain English dictionary on energy terms. So I asked the foundation if they would fund this, and they said, well, we fund policy, not education. And so they didn't see the link between funding the ability for these legislators to understand what they're doing and that leading to smart policy. And the other issue is that technology is easy to measure. You can see it, you can take a picture of it, and policy, it either passes or it doesn't in legislation. But education for a long time has been very, very difficult to measure and get the metrics in. So I want to talk about one thing that we need to start with, and it's this. It's not about being educated, it's about how we're educated. And many people, they have their degrees, and yet they don't understand the links between things. And this is where I believe foundations need to start with. So many times we are forced to look at the reductionist method, and this is, the pros of this is that we've been able to really, by breaking things down to the smallest components, it's been able to help us with the industrial age, and it's why we have engines and even computers. The problem is we can't see how those things are connected to other things. A key example, very simple, that computers are so beneficial when it comes to banking and so on, but we don't see the impact of something simple like email overload and how we manage that in our time during the day. So many people have looked at, well, what about systems thinking? Is this the next big thing? And what is the benefit of that? And there are many different definitions of systems thinking. And my favorite is it's the process of examining and understanding the various parts of a system and the interaction among these components. You're able to see the bigger picture and the consequences of action and or inaction. So I think that one of the problems with the reductionist method, and actually it's in a Hewlett-Packard article that says reductionism is not functional, and that B.C. Goodwin believes the reductionist method has failed us in our ability to understand complex matters and to respond appropriately. And that's really what we need to do. And so if we look at the role of foundations and we start to have them look through the lens of system thinking, where does that take us? Well, I believe it helps foundation to invest in building an ecosystem. It helps them to understand their part in fixing the issue. And so they'll start to look at funding the whole organization, capacity building, looking at sector infrastructure, and research and policy. And those are the things that really can help us move forward. And so if we are looking at this and the focus, thinking from a system approach, provides a better language and a more complete and holistic way of thinking, you're going to see how, as a foundation, you can benefit moving this forward, listening to people on the front line, listening to teachers, building metrics for success, and that has been a key definition for a lot of people, is how do we define what the metrics for success are in somebody's mind and how they think and how they change their behavior. And how do we look at helping an organization to plan long-term and support them in that development. And I think if we have foundations to look at that through the lens of system thinking within their own organization, that is a call to action that I ask them to do. And also, the systems view will help them to really look at their data that they use. And the data usually is tied, is conditioned to output or financial data. And that's what they make their decisions based on. So that's why they tend to look at technology and policy, things that they can easily measure. So I'm actually calling on foundations to be a part of the solution, to really look at this in the bigger picture, and that education is the foundation for us mitigating climate change. And I really ask all of you to communicate with me on your ideas on how they can do that, because otherwise we're going to be continuously behind the ball. And it is really important that we get the foundation to understand their role in what they need to do. And so I'm asking all of you to be a part of this solution and to support the work and ask your foundations to reassess how they do this. So I hope that makes sense. And if there's any questions, I look forward to answering them. Thank you.